Advisory questions were interesting. Everyone wants them, but most of the people we talked to said they weren't that relevant, or they don't tell you a lot of information. And this was from individuals that we talked to in the following towns: Wyndham, Willimantic, so it's a dual town, so to speak, dual structure, Naugatuck, Lebanon.
So we had the advantage of a Hebron bifurcation study that was done in 2011. So Hebron looked at bifurcating their budget. So they have their report online. So we had the advantage of being able to look at what they had found. And to your question about whether bifurcation decreases voting events, they found that it does not in their study. So it says a common justification for bifurcation, reducing voting events and their attendant costs, does not always happen.
Okay. And one thing I wanted to add, because I forgot, and this is important, one thing we did find in all the research is whether you have advisory questions or split budget, it does not help voter turnout at all. In these 9 towns, and this could be a period of 6 or 7 years of research that we got from the towns through the CCM, town-side budgets failed 29% of the time, and education budgets failed 42% of the time. All right? And it's probably consistent with some of the noise that you would hear regarding a Board of Ed budget, but let's put this in perspective. This doesn't surprise me, all right? Because when you have about 2/3 of your town budget collectively, a unitary budget, the Board of Ed, when the majority of the town residents don't use the services of the Board of Ed, this doesn't surprise me. But I just wanted you to be aware that in these towns for which we have the information available, 29% of the time the town side failed, and 42% of the time the Board of Ed side failed. All right? The tough part for our town is that the majority of our tax base is on the residential property owner. If you look at the towns where we looked at split budgets, so Watertown, Simsbury, Newtown, Madison, New Milford, only Madison had a higher tax base from the residential taxpayer, 88%. We're at 81.3, New Milford's at 72, Simsbury's at 76, Watertown's at 73. I'm not talking about personal DMV, I'm talking about residential only. I figure we might as well keep it at that. So our taxpayers kind of struggle. So that's why you have sometimes multiple referendums. Lebanon, Killingly, Newtown, Old Saybrook, those were the towns we looked at. In the cases of 85 separate votes, where we asked the question of what's too high, what's too low, only one time out of those 85 was a budget too low, and that was on the Board of Ed side at Newtown in the 1980s. So the question of binding versus non-binding, okay? I think, I'm not going to speak for every commissioner, because I struggle with this too. I could go on both sides, and I'll tell you why. The positive of a non-binding vote is that you run less the risk of collaboration being lost between town and Board of Ed, because both sides have to pass in order for the budget to get through. That's a positive. The negative is, if one side passes and the other doesn't, why would you want to reopen one where you've known it's passed and then just focus your efforts on the one that needs more work? That's when I, as a taxpayer, said to myself, okay, if one passed and I'm comfortable with it, I want that to be done. And if I were a legislative council person putting on the other hat, I don't want to have to deal with something that I know has passed. So let me focus on what I need to work on. And that way the noise goes down. 2010. The critical thing you have to think about when you have a voter at the booth, we want to know about intent, but we want to get a budget passed. New Milford is a split budget, non-binding, and it has an advisory question very similar to the one that was proposed by the commission, except ours is asked in a different way. All right? Watertown has split budget, no advisory questions, non-binding. Okay? Then
what we found in towns that were successful in passing budgets without lots and lots of referenda was that the communication between the parties was strong and early.
The difference in Watertown was the way they approached the budget. And this was a common theme that we talked to with every one of the towns that had a split budget and were successful with it, is it was less about the ballot itself and how it structured the vote, but what was more important is the lead up to the ballot itself. So what is, in our case, what is Pat? How does Pat interact with the Board of Ed? How does the Board of Ed interact with Pat? And how do collectively the resources of the town are put together in a package that the electorate understands, the voter and the taxpayer understands. All right? Two didn't have a lot of failures in the budget itself, so the reality is those who have good experiences typically have consistently good experiences. Those who have had bad experiences typically is because, one, there's either an underlying issue on one side of the budget or the transparency is questionable as far as the budgets from the beginning and how the town officials at the beginning work together to present the budget as a unified budget.
While the bifurcation doesn't really solve the problem in and of itself, it helps, but it doesn't really get to the root cause. In my opinion, the root cause is, and it would be interesting, you probably don't have this information, but when these other towns that collaborate and cooperate and all that good stuff get together and pass the budget on the first try, is the spread, you know, like this. When your requested budget comes in, one is so high and one is reasonable, in my opinion, that is the root cause. Now, if we're together, as we discussed, then maybe that won't happen. In this vein, if the government could suggest to the town side and the municipal side and the Board of Ed side a range of where to come in, and then we can discuss it based on, you know, rational conditions, I don't think we would have this problem that we've had over the last couple of years, and particularly this year. That's just
pulling apples and oranges out of the same barrel. I don't think that there's any correlation with the, you know, the raw pass rate unless we also take a look at the percentage increase that has been subject to that particular bifurcated vote. And I think that one of the structural problems that we've been having here, and we really had it this year, was that we had a municipal budget that came before us that was responsibly put together and essentially flat. And we started off with a, you know, with a 6-point-something% increase on the educational side, which, well, it started the old bouncing ball, and you had a bunch of people that, you know, immediately dug their heels in and said that, you know, this is just untenable and it's not something that's appropriate to this economy. So it comes back to a lot of the stuff that we have struggled with through this process, and that is taking care of the collaborative work before we actually present budgets, so that when you present a budget, you don't have somebody asking for 8% and somebody asking for 0, and then, you know, wondering, you know, how the heck do you pick up the pieces?
Referring to the comment I made when you were talking to me that these things, collaboration between the municipal body and the Board of Education will only work where there is trust. Recommendation with respect to these collaborative efforts is really work hard at it, because it clearly is needed in this community.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Lodra, you request, go right ahead.
Just another observation. From the perspective of the front office, I would want to remind you that those of us that work in the building collaborate very, very well. That falls apart once it enters the government, and that's a concern that we have. We talk about that in the offices here when Dr. Robinson and I meet, or when the four of us get together, Ron Bukowski and Dr. Robinson and Bob Tate and I, we collaborate very effectively as long as we're in our own space. when we get influenced by or buffeted, I should say, by commentary of others in the government and outside, that's what splits and divides us. So it's a cultural issue, I think, in the community that we all have to recognize and address. The problem is not the people that are in the offices. The problem is elsewhere. And that's a real honest comment that I'm making, that I'm sharing with you, and it's a great concern for us because I think all of us who work in the building value each other and are working hard towards collaboration. It's very difficult to achieve that. It's very much what Jim said. It takes a long time to establish that kind of trust, but we're really working at it. But there are equally as many people working to dismantle it. So it's very difficult, and everybody has to pitch in and be behind it. And that's really not just this body. It's every person who has chosen to put a stake in the ground and say, I'm for this but against that. Those comments hurt all of us. And that is, I've seen a tremendous shift in the culture in this community around those issues, that animosity and that anger and that finger pointing, and that we have to push back equally hard and say that is not helping this community thrive. It's not helping us be the best we can be. So again, it's not the people that are in the places, that are in the offices. It's all the rest of it. It's the noise that's created around what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
Back to these collaborative efforts is really work hard at it because it clearly is needed in this community.
Thank you.
Okay.
Really, if we don't accept what we have here, it probably puts an end to the charter revision process for this go-around.
And you had said that you purposely did not research limiting the number of referenda. Did you come across anything in your research that had towns that said, you know, once you get to 3, then something else happens?